The warning alarm screamed through the corridors of Earth Station Alpha as massive shapes appeared on the long-range sensors. Jake Morrison stood in the command center, his coffee growing cold in his hands as he watched the display screens fill with impossible readings. The objects were huge, easily 10 times the size of anything humans had ever built, and they were moving toward Earth with purpose. "Sir, we're getting communication attempts on multiple frequencies," reported Lieutenant Lisa Shang from her position at the communications array. Her voice stayed steady despite the tremor in her hands as she adjusted the controls. "They're using some kind of universal translation matrix. The signals are coming through clearly now." Jake set down his coffee and straightened his uniform. 3 years commanding the orbital station had prepared him for many scenarios. But first contact with alien species had always seemed like something for the next generation to worry about. He walked over to the main communication console where Richard Stone, the station's diplomatic liaison, was already reviewing preliminary contact protocols. "Put them through," Jake ordered, knowing that whatever happened in the next few minutes would change human history forever. The main screen flickered and then displayed something that made several crew members step backward. The alien was enormous, standing at least 10 feet tall with a broad chest covered in what looked like natural armor plating. Its skin had a dark, metallic sheen and 4 powerful arms extended from its torso. The creature's head was elongated with small black eyes that seemed to study the humans with barely concealed disdain. "I am War Commander Thekvar of the Zephyrian Empire," the alien spoke, its voice deep and resonating through the communication system. "We have observed your species for several rotations and have decided to make formal contact. You will prepare a delegation to meet with our representatives." Jake glanced at Richard, who nodded slightly. The diplomatic protocols they had studied for years suddenly seemed inadequate when faced with a being that looked like it could tear apart their space station with its bare hands. "This is Commander Jake Morrison of Earth Station Alpha. We welcome your contact and are prepared to establish diplomatic relations." The alien's expression didn't change, but something in its posture suggested amusement. "Diplomatic relations assume equality between species. You will demonstrate your species' worthiness before such relations can be considered. Prepare your strongest individuals for evaluation." The communication ended abruptly, leaving the command center in silence. Jake looked around at his crew, seeing the same mixture of excitement and fear on every face. Lisa was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, the sensor readings show they have at least 50 ships out there. Each one is larger than anything in our fleet." Richard was already pulling up files on his tablet, scrolling through contact protocols that suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. "Commander, we need to notify Earth Command immediately. This is beyond anything we prepared for. They're talking about evaluating our species like we're applying for membership in some kind of club." Jake nodded and activated the priority communication channel to Earth. Within minutes, he was speaking directly to Admiral Kevin Brooks at Earth Defense Command. The conversation was brief but intense, with the Admiral ordering Jake to maintain contact while Earth's leadership decided how to respond. 2 hours later, the Zephyrian ships moved closer to Earth Station Alpha. Jake watched from the observation deck as one of the smaller vessels approached the station's docking bay. The ship was still massive compared to human standards, its dark hull covered in what looked like weapon ports and sensor arrays. As it docked, Jake felt the entire station vibrate from the impact. The airlock cycled, and Jake found himself face to face with beings that made humans look like children. War Commander Thekvar entered first, followed by 2 other aliens of similar size but with slightly different armor patterns. Behind them came a smaller alien, though still taller than any human, carrying what appeared to be recording equipment. "I am Sub-Commander Veltar," the smaller alien announced. "I will observe and record your species' capabilities for evaluation by the Empire Council." Jake led the aliens to the station's main conference room, which suddenly felt cramped with the massive visitors inside. Lisa and Richard flanked him at the table while the aliens arranged themselves across from the humans. The size difference was overwhelming, making Jake feel like he was negotiating with giants. Your species appears physically weak, Dekvar observed, his black eyes studying the humans. In the Empire, strength determines status. The strong lead. The weak serve. Show us your strongest individuals. Richard leaned forward carefully. Commander, our species has many different kinds of strength. We have intellectual capabilities, technological achievements, and cultural developments that might interest your empire. Dekvar made a sound that might have been laughter. Interesting words from a species that builds with metal and plastic instead of growing proper armor. Physical strength is the only measure that matters. A species too weak to defend itself has no place among the stars. Jake felt his temper rising but kept his voice level. What exactly are you proposing? A simple test, the war commander replied. Select your strongest individuals for combat trials. If they can demonstrate adequate strength, your species may be granted junior status within the Empire. If they fail, your world will become a protected colony under Zephyrian oversight for your own safety. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. They weren't talking about trade agreements or cultural exchange. They were talking about Earth's independence, and if we refuse? Dekvar gestured toward the observation windows where the massive alien fleet was visible against the stars. Refusal is not an option for species incapable of defending themselves. The Empire protects the weak, whether they wish it or not. Sub-Commander Veltar activated his recording device and spoke into it. Initial contact confirms preliminary observations. Human species demonstrates typical weak flesh characteristics. Recommend standard protection protocols following inevitable trial failure. Jake looked at Lisa and Richard, seeing his own thoughts reflected in their faces. They were trapped between accepting an impossible challenge and losing Earth's freedom without even trying. The aliens clearly believed humans were too weak to be anything more than a protected species, barely above pets in their galactic hierarchy. We need time to prepare, Jake said finally. How long do we have? One rotation of your planet around its star, Dekvar replied. Veltar will remain to observe your preparations and ensure no deception occurs. As the aliens prepared to leave, Jake realized that everything humanity had worked for, every dream of exploring the stars as free people, now depended on proving they were strong enough to deserve freedom. The problem was, looking at these massive beings with their natural armor and incredible size, Jake wasn't sure any human could match their physical capabilities. The war commander paused at the airlock. Do not disappoint us, small ones. The Empire has little patience for weakness. The emergency session at Earth Defense Command lasted 18 hours. General Patricia Wells paced the length of the conference room while dozens of military leaders, scientists, and government officials debated options that all seemed equally hopeless. Admiral Kevin Brooks had assembled every expert on human physical capabilities, but the numbers told a grim story. Our strongest weightlifters can barely manage 800 pounds in a deadlift, reported Dr. Carl Newton, the military's chief. Physical fitness advisor? Based on the preliminary scans from Station Alpha, these Zephyrians appear to have muscle density at least 4 times greater than human maximum. We're not just outmatched, we're completely outclassed. General Wells stopped pacing and turned to face the room. What about enhancement programs? Genetic modification, cybernetic implants, performance drugs. Everything we've been developing. For special forces, Dr. Newton shook his head. Even our most advanced enhancement protocols might give us a 20% increase in strength. These aliens are operating on a completely different scale. It would be like sending a house cat to fight a grizzly bear. Meanwhile, Sub-Commander Veltar had taken up residence on Earth Station Alpha, observing human activities with the detached interest of a scientist studying laboratory animals. Jake Morrison watched the alien record everything with growing frustration. Veltar showed no interest in human technology, art, or culture. The alien only paid attention when humans demonstrated physical activities. Lisa Chang had been assigned to work with Veltar as a cultural liaison, though the alien showed little interest in cultural exchange. During their daily briefings, she tried to explain human achievements in science, medicine, and exploration. But Veltar dismissed these topics as irrelevant. Your species builds tools to compensate for physical weakness. Veltar observed while watching human engineers repair a damaged section of the station. True strength comes from within, not from metal constructs. The Empire values species that can survive and thrive through personal power alone. Lisa watched the alien record footage of the repair work, noting how Veltar focused only on the humans' physical movements and ignored the complex problem-solving required to diagnose and fix the technical issues. Don't you think intelligence and creativity are forms of strength too? Veltar made the sound Jake had learned meant dismissal or contempt. Clever tricks are useful for weak species, but they cannot replace true power. When faced with real danger, tools break and cleverness fails. Only physical strength endures. Back on Earth, the search for humanity's strongest individuals had become desperate. Colonel Pete Jackson was running training programs at military bases around the world, pushing elite soldiers to their absolute limits. The results were impressive, by human standards, but laughable compared to what they faced. "Sir, I've got our best candidate," Pete reported to General Wells during a secure video conference. Marine Sergeant Bob Clark can bench press 450 pounds and deadlift 700. He's completed every special operations course we have and survived situations that would kill most people. General Wells looked at the file on her screen. Sergeant Clark was indeed an impressive human specimen, but she had seen the footage from Station Alpha. The Zephyrians made him look like a child playing at being strong. "Colonel, be honest with me. Could Sergeant Clark last 30 seconds against one of these aliens in hand-to-hand combat?" Pete hesitated before answering. "Ma'am, based on what we've observed, I'd say no. These beings appear to be stronger than our most powerful construction equipment. Clark is tough, but he's still human." Dr. Lisa Chang had been conducting her own research into Zephyrian psychology and biology, working with the limited data available from Veltar's presence and the communication records. She began to piece together a picture of alien society that both fascinated and troubled her. "They come from a world where individual combat determined everything," she explained to Jake during one of their private briefings. Their entire civilization developed around the concept that physical strength equals worth. They have no concept of collective achievement or technological advancement driven by curiosity rather than necessity. Jake studied the reports Lisa had compiled. "So they literally cannot understand how we've achieved what we have without being physically superior." "Exactly," Lisa confirmed. "To them, our cities, our space program, our medical advances, all of it is just clever compensation for being weak. They see our tools and technology the same way we might view a disabled person's wheelchair. Useful for the handicapped, but not a sign of strength." The observation was proven correct when Veltar witnessed a demonstration of human military capabilities. General Wells had arranged for the alien to observe tank maneuvers, fighter jet exercises, and artillery demonstrations, hoping to show that humans possessed destructive power even if they lacked individual physical strength. Veltar recorded everything but seemed unimpressed. "These weapons require groups of your people to operate," he noted. "True warriors need no assistance from others or from machines. A Zephyrian commander conquers through personal power, not through hiding behind metal constructs." Richard Stone tried a different approach, showing Veltar recordings of human athletic competitions, hoping that displays of human speed, agility, and endurance might earn some respect. The alien watched footage of Olympic weightlifters, strongman competitions, and martial arts tournaments with the same detached interest he showed everything else. "Your strongest individuals would be considered juveniles in Zephyrian society," Veltar commented after watching a heavyweight boxing match. "Our children possess greater physical capabilities than your champions. It is clear why your species developed so many external tools. Without them, you could not survive." The psychological impact on Earth's leadership was devastating. Admiral Brooks found himself questioning everything humanity had accomplished. If beings this powerful existed in the galaxy, how had humans ever believed they were ready to explore the stars? Were they really nothing more than clever weaklings hiding behind their technology? Dr. Newton, reported similar feelings among the military personnel training for the upcoming trials. Morale is at rock bottom, sir. These soldiers have spent their entire careers believing they were the toughest, strongest people on Earth. Now they're facing opponents who make them feel like children. Some are requesting transfer out of the program. But not everyone was losing hope. Lisa Chang spent her evenings in the station's library, researching everything she could find about human history, psychology, and the unique aspects of human behavior that set them apart from other Earth species. Something about Valtar's dismissive attitude bothered her, and she was determined to figure out what the aliens were missing. Her breakthrough came when she realized that Valtar had never asked about human warfare, human exploration, or human survival in extreme conditions. The alien only cared about individual physical capabilities, completely ignoring the collective achievements that had allowed humanity to dominate their planet and reach for the stars. Late one night, as she watched Valtar record footage of human maintenance workers, Lisa began to form a theory that would change everything. The Zephyrians weren't just measuring the wrong kind of strength. They were measuring strength itself in a way that completely missed what made humans truly dangerous. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. when Dr. Lisa Chang was reviewing footage of Valtar's daily observations. She had been watching the alien record human activities for weeks, and something finally clicked in her tired mind. The Zephyrian never showed interest when humans worked together to solve problems, never recorded moments of human creativity or adaptation, and completely ignored instances where humans overcame impossible odds through determination rather than strength. Lisa called Jake Morrison from her quarters, despite the late hour. "Commander, I need you to see something. I think I know what we're missing." Jake arrived at the research lab 20 minutes later, still in his sleep clothes but alert. Lisa had multiple screens displaying various recordings of human activities, alongside Zephyrian behavioral data she had compiled. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a graph showing Valtar's interest levels during different observations. The alien's attention spikes only when humans demonstrate pure physical activities, like lifting, running, or fighting. But watch what happens when humans solve complex problems, work as teams, or adapt to unexpected situations. The graph showed Valtar's interest dropping to almost zero during these moments. Jake studied the data. "So he's literally blind to everything that makes humans successful." "Exactly," Lisa confirmed. "I've been studying their culture based on everything Valtar has told us." The Zephyrians evolved on a world where individual combat was everything. The strongest survived, the weak died. They never developed complex societies, never needed to cooperate on large scales, never faced problems that required creativity rather than brute force. She pulled up another screen showing brain scans she had taken of Valtar during various activities. "Look at his neural activity. When he sees physical strength demonstrations, his brain lights up like Christmas. But when humans show solving, teamwork, or adaptive behavior, whole sections of his brain stay dark. He literally cannot process these concepts as forms of strength." Jake felt something like hope stirring in his chest for the first time in weeks. "Are you saying they don't understand what they're looking at when humans work together?" "More than that," Lisa said excitedly. "I think their brains are hardwired to only recognize individual physical dominance. They're essentially blind to collective intelligence, adaptive problem-solving, and what we might call crazy determination." The next morning, Jake called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. Lisa presented her findings to Richard Stone and the other department heads, explaining how the Zephyrians' evolutionary background had created a species that could only understand one type of strength. "So what do we do with this information?" Richard asked. "Even if they can't understand our strengths, we still have to face their physical superiority in whatever trials they've planned." Lisa had been thinking about that all night. What if the trials aren't really about physical strength? What if we can design challenges that look like strength contests but actually test the things humans excel at? Jake leaned forward. "Explain." Think about it," Lisa continued. "They expect us to fail, so they're not going to make the trials impossible. They want to see us try and fail in ways that confirm their beliefs about physical strength being everything. But what if we can turn their expectations against them? Meanwhile, back on Earth, a very different kind of preparation was beginning. Dr. Amy Foster had been brought in to study the preliminary data about Zephyrian physiology. Her background in comparative biology and evolutionary psychology made her perfect for understanding how the aliens thought and moved. They're incredibly strong, but that strength comes with limitations, Amy reported to General Wells. Muscle density that high requires enormous energy consumption. Their reaction times are actually slower than humans because their nervous systems are optimized for power, not speed. And their bone structure suggests they evolved in higher gravity, which means they might be less adaptable to different environments. General Wells studied Amy's report with growing interest. Are you saying we have advantages they don't know about? I'm saying we're different in ways they can't even comprehend, Amy replied. They see our smaller size and lighter build as weakness. But what if it's actually a different kind of strength? We're more adaptable, more efficient, and we can think our way around problems instead of just overpowering them. This new perspective began to change how Earth's leadership approached the coming trials. Instead of trying to find humans who could match alien strength, they started looking for people who embodied uniquely human characteristics. Ben Carter was a tactical analyst who had spent years studying asymmetric warfare. When approached about joining the trial team, he immediately understood what they needed. We're not trying to beat them at their game, he told the selection committee. We need to change the game entirely. Dr. Helen Park was a psychologist who specialized in extreme stress responses and human behavior under impossible conditions. Her research into how people survived disasters and overcame seemingly hopeless situations became crucial to developing the new strategy. The team that began forming was unlike anything the military had ever assembled. Tony Martinez was an engineer who could build solutions from scrap metal and spare parts. Susan Wright was an artist whose creative thinking had helped solve technical problems for NASA. Danny Cooper was a former circus performer whose unusual skills and fearless attitude made him perfect for unexpected challenges. Jake watched this diverse group train together and felt something he hadn't experienced since the Zephyrians arrived: confidence. These people weren't the strongest humans on Earth, but they represented something the aliens couldn't understand or measure. The key is misdirection, Ben explained during one of their strategy sessions. They expect us to try matching their strength directly. When we do something completely different, their brains won't be able to process it as a form of strength. Helen added her psychological insights. Human history is full of people doing impossible things through sheer determination. We've climbed mountains that should have killed us, explored places that should have been unreachable, and survived situations that should have been fatal. Not through superior strength, but through superior stubbornness. As the months passed, Veltar continued his observations, growing more confident that humans would fail spectacularly in the trials. He recorded their training sessions with what Jake had learned to recognize as amusement, sending regular reports to the Zephyrian fleet about human weakness and inadequacy. The flesh creatures continue their pathetic preparations, Veltar reported. To War Commander Thekvar, they have selected individuals who are even weaker than their military specimens. Some appear to be artisans and technicians rather than warriors. Their failure will be swift and absolute. But Veltar had missed something crucial in his observations. He had recorded hours of human training, but he had never understood what he was watching. When Tony Martinez built a leverage system to move heavy objects, Veltar saw cheating rather than engineering. When Susan Wright found creative solutions to combat scenarios, the aliens saw weakness rather than adaptability. When Danny Cooper performed seemingly impossible acrobatic feats, Veltar dismissed it as useless showmanship. The alien was blind to the very qualities that made humans dangerous, and his reports to the Zephyrian fleet reflected that blindness. The Empire was preparing for a demonstration of human weakness, expecting to see primitive creatures fail at basic tests of strength and endurance. They had no idea they were about to encounter something their evolutionary history had never prepared them to understand: the peculiar human combination of intelligence, creativity, and absolute refusal to accept defeat even when facing impossible odds. As the trial date approached, Jake Morrison looked at his assembled team and felt ready for the first time since first contact. They might not be able to match Zephyrian strength, but they were about to show the galaxy what human madness could accomplish. The Zephyrian trial vessel was larger than any human structure ever built. Jake Morrison stood with his team in the massive cargo bay that had been converted into an arena, watching hundreds of aliens fill the observation platforms above them. The ceiling stretched so high it disappeared into shadows, and the walls were covered with recording devices that would broadcast humanity's expected failure across the Empire. War Commander Thekvar stood on the central platform, his four arms spread wide as he addressed the assembled crowd. Today we witness the evaluation of the species that calls itself human. They will face 3 trials that measure the only qualities that matter in the galaxy: individual strength, combat prowess, and the will to dominate. Jake looked at his team spread out across the arena floor. Tony Martinez checked his tool belt one final time. Susan Wright sketched quick diagrams in a notebook she had somehow convinced the aliens to let her bring. Danny Cooper stretched like he was preparing for a performance rather than a trial that would determine Earth's fate. Dr. Helen Park stood perfectly still, her eyes closed in meditation. The first trial began when massive mechanical arms lowered a stone block into the center of the arena. The block was easily 20 feet on each side, made of some dense black material that seemed to absorb light. Thekvar's voice echoed through the space as he explained the rules. This is compressed dark stone from our homeworld. It weighs the equivalent of 50 of your tons. Your strongest individual must move this block from its current position to the marked circle 30 paces away. You have 1 attempt. The Zephyrians in the observation areas made sounds that Jake had learned meant anticipation and amusement. They expected to watch humans straying uselessly against an impossible weight. Confirming their beliefs about human weakness, Sergeant Bob Clark stepped forward first, as planned. He was the strongest human they had been able to find, and his role was crucial to their strategy. Clark walked around the block, examining it carefully while the aliens recorded his every movement. He placed his hands against the stone and pushed with everything he had. His face turning red from the effort, the block did not move even a fraction of an inch. Clark tried again, this time attempting to lift one edge of the massive stone. His muscles bulged with effort, tendons standing out on his neck, but the block remained perfectly still. After 5 minutes of increasingly desperate attempts, he stepped back in apparent defeat. The Zephyrians made satisfied sounds. This was exactly what they had expected from the weak flesh creatures. Then Tony Martinez stepped forward with a metal bar he had salvaged from debris in the staging area. The aliens watched with confused interest as he positioned the bar under one edge of the stone block and placed a smaller piece of debris beneath it as a fulcrum point. Physics is the same everywhere in the universe, Tony said quietly as he pushed down on the opposite end of the lever. The massive block lifted smoothly into the air. The arena fell silent except for the sound of Tony's improvised wheel system as he rolled the 20-ton stone across the floor like it weighed nothing at all. He guided it carefully into the marked circle and stepped back, wiping his hands on his coveralls. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Thekvar stared at the moved block, his 4 arms twitching in what Jake recognized as confusion. The War Commander had never seen anything like this before, and his brain was struggling to process what had happened. "The block has been moved," Veltar announced finally, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "The trial requirement has been met." The second trial began immediately, as if the aliens wanted to move past their confusion. The arena floor opened to reveal a combat pit surrounded by energy barriers. A Zephyrian warrior entered from the opposite side, his natural armor gleaming under the arena lights. He was even larger than Thekvar, standing nearly 12 feet tall with arms like tree trunks. "This is Combat Prime Zeldek," Thekvar announced. "He has never known defeat in personal combat." Your champion will face him with no weapons, no tools, no assistance. This is the true test of strength. The human team had debated this moment for months. Every simulation, every analysis showed the same result. No human could match a Zephyrian warrior in direct physical combat. But they had never planned to try. Sarah Kim stepped into the combat pit. She was a pilot, not a soldier, and she looked impossibly small next to the massive alien warrior. The Zephyrians made sounds of disbelief. Had the humans sent someone even weaker than their soldiers, Zeldik moved toward Sarah with the confidence of a predator approaching helpless prey. His massive fists could crush human bones like twigs, and his natural armor made him nearly invulnerable to anything Sarah could do to him, but Sarah was not looking at her opponent. She was studying the arena itself. As Zeldik charged toward her, Sarah dove to one side and slapped her hand against a control panel she had noticed embedded in the arena wall. The artificial gravity field that kept spectators safely in their seats suddenly reversed its polarity in a small section above. The combat pit Zeldik, who weighed nearly half a ton, was suddenly pulled upward by invisible forces. He flailed his forearms desperately as he smashed into the arena ceiling with bone-crushing force, then fell back to the floor unconscious. Sarah stood over her defeated opponent, breathing hard but uninjured. She had not used strength to win. She had used her pilot's understanding of artificial gravity systems and her human instinct to weaponize her environment. The arena erupted in confusion. Zephyrians were shouting at each other in their own language, trying to understand what had happened. Some claimed the human had cheated. Others argued that she had simply used the arena's own systems against her opponent. Thekvar's voice cut through the chaos. The combat prime has been defeated. The trial requirement has been met. He sounded like he was forcing himself to say the words, but the third trial would be different. The aliens brought out their ultimate test. Combat Master Drakthar, the greatest warrior in Zephyrian history. He had never been defeated in over 200 battles, and had personally conquered 3 different species for the Empire. Drakthar was ancient even by Zephyrian standards, his armor bearing the scars of countless victories. He moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent centuries perfecting the art of combat. This time, the aliens made sure there were no environmental systems the human could exploit. The human team huddled briefly to discuss their options. Everyone expected them to send their strongest fighter, perhaps Bob Clark or one of the other military personnel. Instead, a small woman with graying hair stepped forward. Margaret Stone was the ship's librarian and amateur historian. She had never been in a fight in her entire life and looked like a gentle grandmother compared to the terrifying alien warrior. The Zephyrians fell silent, certain they were witnessing some kind of human mental breakdown. Margaret walked calmly toward Drakthar, who towered over her like a mountain. She showed no fear, no hesitation, as if she were approaching a friend rather than the most dangerous warrior in the galaxy. As she drew closer, Margaret began to speak in a language that made every Zephyrian in the arena freeze in shock. She was speaking ancient Zephyrian, the ritual tongue of their ancestors, using words that had not been heard for thousands of years. By the old laws and the ancient codes, Margaret said, her pronunciation perfect despite having learned the language from fragments and recordings, I speak the words of ending. Drakthar of the 7th clan, your battles are finished. Your victories are complete. Your ancestors call you home. Drakthar stopped moving entirely. The ancient surrender ritual was carved into the deepest levels of Zephyrian instinct, older than their spacefaring civilization, older than their concept of empire. No enemy had ever known these words, never used their own cultural programming against them. The old warrior looked down at the small human woman, who had somehow learned the most sacred words of his people. Slowly, with great dignity, he removed his helmet and placed it at Margaret's feet. I am defeated, he said in the common tongue, not by strength but by wisdom. The trial is yours, small teacher. The arena was completely silent. In the space of an hour, humans had moved an impossible weight, defeated an unbeatable warrior, and used ancient knowledge to overcome a legendary champion. They had done it all without matching Zephyrian strength even once. War Commander Thekvar stared down at the 3 completed trials, his worldview crumbling around him. Everything he understood about strength and weakness had just been turned upside down by a species he had dismissed as pathetically weak. For the first time in Zephyrian history, they had encountered something their evolution had never prepared them to face: the peculiar human ability to find impossible solutions to impossible problems.